So firstly, for everyone on the call, hello, good evening. So my name is Matt. If you've not met me before, I head up the design team here at Redgate. Obviously, big welcome to you all. This is our ingeniously simple Redgate meetup, where I'm joined today by our co-host Mandar. Mandar, wave please. Or not? Cool. And just a quick bit about Redgate and what we do. So for those of you who don't know, Redgate is a leading vendor in the database software B2B space. It's been successful in making ingeniously simple products and tools for over 20 years. And we have a growing team of designers here who are embedding cross-functional product teams, a bit like what Ioannis was just talking about. And they're responsible for the research, design, and implementation of our product and experiences. A Redgate design team is considered as an integral part of how we both define and deliver value to our customers. That's a bit about us. Purpose. So we've been running this meetup. I was thinking about it earlier, actually. We've been running this meetup for over 10 years in different shapes and forms. Obviously, we used to do it physically, and that would be a community for local Cambridge-based folk. And more recently, we've been able to kind of expand our reach and do it via this kind of virtual format. We started to create these meetups essentially as a kind of safe space and friendly community for people to share best practice and their insights around user experience, research, and product. And we understand, obviously, that not everyone can attend expensive conferences and events. So this is kind of our attempt to give something back for free to the wider design community. So moving on, obviously, we're here tonight with Ioannis. Ioannis, you give everyone a wave. So Ioannis is an interaction designer working at Google for Google Maps, assisting people everywhere as they navigate, explore, and get things done in the world. I'm sure we've all used the product or are familiar with the product. So thank you, Ioannis. Previously, Ioannis has worked in various technical verticals from e-commerce, companies like MOO Print, fintech, and B2B SaaS space. He comes from an industrial design background, holding an integrated MSc and HCI. Ioannis is a TEDx speaker, so yeah, he's here with us tonight. So I'm very thankful to have him. And he's also a design mentor with DesignLabs. Ioannis is going to talk to us about maximizing the rate of learning by minimizing the time to try and build products that have product market fit and lower the risk of failure. So without further ado, I am going to hand over to Ioannis. Before I start, actually, sorry, if you've got any questions, if you want to post them via the chat feature as we go. If not, Mandar will circle back at the end and take questions for Ioannis. So yeah, if you have anything as you go, post them. Otherwise, we'll come back and open questioning afterwards. Stop sharing.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Matt, for the intro. And hi, everyone. So let me share my screen here. Let's see. You should be seeing my screen. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. Okay. I think there's a bit of lag. But okay. Everything fine? Everyone
Yep,
can see
all
my
good.
screen, all right?
Yep, all good.
Great. Awesome. Okay. All righty. So yeah, again, thanks for having me here. I'm here to talk about how to maximize the value of the MVP. And as I said, hi everyone. I'm Ioannis. I'm interactive designer at Google, working on Google Maps here in London. I hope everything is all right with you. You're staying safe and healthy. So yeah, as I said today, I'd like to share with you a method that I've been using for some time now, which has helped me in my design journey so far to build products that are not based on personal biases. They achieve product market fit and address real customer needs. So first, I'm going to set the context a little bit and then talk about, the method itself. All right. So having started my digital product design career in startups, I became a big fan of the lean startup movement. And I love the underlying principle of testing, of learning, and pivoting by experimenting, the most basic product prototypes. And I remember the first time I came across a three-letter abbreviation. I think it's the biggest buzzword in tech industry, which is the minimum viable product, also known as the MVP. And if you Google it, you'll get around 280 million results for that search term. And just this goes to show how popular this search term is. And back then, I was surprised by the idea of incrementally iterating by shipping the product and learning from the launch, especially because, and as I said, coming from industrial design background, the design methodology, although is similar, the process of building products didn't actually involve much iteration after the product hits the shelves. So since then, I've had many conversations with UX and with product and engineering folks about MVPs and their overall value. And I have seen that people have become a little bit, let's say, allergic to this word because of its preconceived notions. And sometimes I wonder, can you blame them? I'm pretty sure that we are all familiar with this scenario. So a high exec in your org likes the idea of the MVP, but doesn't really understand it. They say, great, that's what we should do to build the product that we've envisioned. And then suddenly there's a product team that is tasked to solve a problem that we actually don't even know if it addresses real user needs in the first place. In addition, you will often hear that there is not enough time for research or not enough time to properly explore your design ideas. And quite frankly, you are just pressured to get a product which is, again, based on biases and assumptions out the door as soon as possible. And halfway through the project, after you've spent a significant amount of time designing and getting buy-in for your designs from your stakeholders, your team actually finds out that the MVP is far more difficult to implement and decides to cut corners just to hit the deadline. And I'm pretty sure like 99% of the time, what this means is that the team would be cutting corners on important functionality just for the V0. V1 and V2, we will come, in later iterations as fast follow-ups, as they will say. And what's the result? Well, the shipped result is a half-baked product that we are not always very proud of, and users find it confusing. In most cases, that MVP lives in production for 1 or 2 years until someone else joins the company and tries to fix it. Well, and what about the learnings? Surely that wasn't, for nothing, right? Well, we've learned that some of the core assumptions that we were making were not true, but it's already too late. The cost of changing the shipped product is way bigger. And what happens is that we build on top of it with spaghetti code and clunky information architecture and a lot of design debt, essentially. But what about, the fail fast and learn fast mentality that everyone is talking about in the startup world? Well, that is, I think, the biggest misconceptions. The biggest misconception about the MVP. So one could ask, are then MVPs the wrong way to build products? Well, fundamentally, no. Well, Eric Ries, who coined the term MVP in his book, The Lean Startup, he defines an MVP as something that allows a team to collect the maximum amount of validated learning about customers with the least effort. And what I've seen, though, in most cases is actually the exact opposite, because we focus too much on assumptions about the system and also the user's needs, instead of thinking about what do we really need to learn before moving forward and building the product. So the reason why MVPs fail is not because they don't work. It's because we are using them wrong. And usually we let our own biases, or even worse, the HIPPO's biases, affect the product that we are building. And when I say HIPPO's, I don't mean those HIPPO's, but I actually mean those HIPPO's. So the highest paid person opinions, where oftentimes we feel powerless to counter their arguments, because usually we don't have the data or research to back it up, as a result of, again, there's no time for it, or because research is too expensive, or my worst argument of all time, when a high level exec says, I know what users want. So I've found a tool that has helped me tackle this problem. And it didn't make the product, let's say, bulletproof, but rather helped me manage my stakeholders' biases, both in my current workplace at Google and previous companies, and has helped the teams I was working with build confidence in the viability of our ideas. And actually, I'd like to dive deeper and share this tool and experience with you today. So first, though, I'll lay some context to also understand what the tool is about. Okay, so in the UX field, there are a number of rules, and I'm pretty sure that you've heard of them, also known as the UX rules. And one of those is Occam's razor. Occam apparently was a philosopher and theologian in the 1900s. So what this rule says, Occam's razor, is that among competing hypotheses, the one with the fewest assumptions should be selected. And if those hypotheses actually predict equally well, the one with the fewest assumptions should be selected. But why this is important? Well, because everything we design is based on ideas, and those ideas are influenced by our own biases. Also, the biases of our team and our stakeholders on how we think users will react to our ideas, right? So the fewer assumptions we have about our solutions or concepts or design concepts, the better our designs will accommodate our users' mental models, and thus create an experience that aligns with their needs much better. So at this point, I'd like to introduce the Riskiest Assumptions Framework. And you'll be probably thinking right now, how do you know which assumption to test? I mean, you might have 5 or 10 or 15 assumptions for just a specific feature, let alone, the product itself. So a few years ago, I came across the concept of riskiest assumption testing by Rick Higgin, where he discusses that the key is rapid small tests. So what's the smallest experiment that you can make to test your biggest assumption? In other words, as Tom Chi, a co-founder of Google X, puts it, how can you maximize the rate of learning by minimizing the time to try things? And once you've validated the riskiest assumption, you can move on to the next largest one. And this way, gradually, you'll be building confidence in your idea. Right. But how do you know which assumptions are the riskiest ones? And that's a great question. For that, let's talk a little bit about the business world, right? And for this one, I'd like to quote Don Norman to help me define this. So what Don Norman says is that to understand products, it is not enough to understand design or technology. It is crucial to understand business. Okay, sounds reasonable, but what does it actually mean? Well, it's not the type of dilemma of whether or not designers should learn how to code, or designers should get an MBA, for example. Actually, it's quite far from it. What it means is that since we are working for a business, we have to understand how risk is defined in the business world. So let me shed some light really quickly on this one, on defining risk. So risk is nothing more than the quantitatively defined impact of an event times the also quantitatively defined probability of that event occurring. But just to put it simply, risk equals impact times probability. So why was this previous bit important, I hear you ask? Well, it's crucial to the next part, which is actually the tool itself, the Riskiest Assumption Canvas. And this is inspired by the Canvas frameworks from service design. And I created this canvas based on several iterations while doing this exercise in my previous companies, but also Google as well. So here's how it works. All right. In the previous companies that I worked at, when I was trying to use the Riskiest Assumptions Framework, I observed that my team and I would get blocked on how to start coming up with riskiest assumptions. What I saw as a common behavior was that people would start just randomly write their assumptions in post-it notes and then trying to cluster them into groups. And there would be duplications of groups, for example, because two people would create the same category, and we would need to consolidate them into one. And generally, it was just time consuming to make sure that every assumption would fit in a group. And that was especially true when we were thinking about new products that we wanted to build. So I observed that oftentimes we would come up with the same categories again and again. And what I did was that I started using predefined categories to just help jumpstart the process. And it was then when I realized that I can actually use those predefined categories in some sort of Canvas tool, which can be used then as a springboard to generate assumptions really quickly with my team. So, for example, I found that sometimes we didn't have a clear idea of who the end user would be for our new product, or which specific segment of users we are targeting. So that's why I would usually have a group called customers, which then made it easy to start generating assumptions for it. Another reason why I decided to create those predefined categories was to remind my team that we have to come back to that canvas and work on our assumptions for different stages of the design process. For example, when brainstorming solutions and creating design concepts, because then we could map each risky assumption against the concept and the ideas for a product. But of course, as I said, the canvas can be adjusted to fit the needs of any team, especially if the product is already an existing one. So okay, so how can you use this tool? All right, step one is to gather your main stakeholders in one room or a virtual room nowadays, and map all your assumptions that are vital to your product. So how I do this exercise is that I ask them questions about what problem are we trying to solve and why, who our customers are, what insights do we have from speaking to sales or customer support, and think of this exercise like ask the experts session when you are running design sprints, and then cluster those assumptions into groups. And as I mentioned before, I have seen some common patterns when clustering those groups together. So the canvas has some predefined categories, but you can adjust based on your own findings essentially. But for this canvas, as it is, you'd have to write your assumptions for categories like customers. So in that category, think about who are your customers. How do they use your product? What value do they get from the current product solution? What's their core job to be done? For the problem category, think about whether or not you have identified a pain point for your target customers. What are they missing from your current product? What are they currently doing to mitigate the problem or even solve it? Do they even have a workaround in place? Then another category is solutions. So in this category, think about your design ideas or solutions as assumptions. How your proposed solutions solve your customers' needs and how do they impact the current product? Then there's another category about the MVP, and you can think about what is the MVP solution for your customers, that will pay for. Then there's another category which is about competition, and here you can think about who else is providing this solution. What is their competitive advantage, for example? What is your competitive advantage from your point of view? And finally, there's the category about sales channels. So think about how will you sell your product or service? Is it online? Is it inside sales, outside sales? What kind of distribution? And the next step number two, it's actually the fun bit, but also the most important one for this tool to work. In this step, you have to think about the probability and the impact of each assumption that you came up in the previous step and score them based on the formula that we talked about before. Again, that formula being risk equals impact times probability. So In that formula, actually, we have two factors. So I'm going to start with probability first. And that factor is on a scale of 1 to 5. And this is quite interesting because it's like an inverse confidence rating. So what this means is that the less confident you are about your assumption, the higher the number. But someone would ask, but why inverse confidence, Ioannis? Well, in good scientific experiments, researchers should seek to falsify their hypotheses, not to confirm them, because there's a high risk of running into one of the most trickiest cognitive biases, and that is the confirmation bias. Or in other words, our human tendency to cherry pick information that confirms our existing beliefs. All right, but hold on. How do you define confidence? Well, that's a great question. That might be a bit trivial, but I've found that there is only one way to calculate confidence, and that is by looking for supporting evidence, essentially. All right, and to do that, you can use a tool called a confidence wheel, which is inspired by Itmar Gilad, who's also an ex-Googler. When you're using this confidence wheel, consider what signals do you have already and what do you need to do next to gain even more confidence. So as you can see, when an assumption has a probability score of 5 or 4, you have basically zero confidence because you know nothing about it, right? It could be a finger in the air or a gut feeling or just a personal opinion. A probability score of 3 can be signals that you have from either, let's say, market trends or competitor research with a product that have similar features with yours, and thus assuming that people who use that competitor product have also similar needs. However, just because, let's say, Apple is doing it or someone else, it doesn't mean that it's true for your product too. And that's why the probability of being wrong is still relatively high. A score of 2 is when you have research findings that are based on either user testing or surveys, or even from users requesting specific features or expressing a pain point of theirs. That's when there is a high chance that this assumption might be true. So the probability score is low. And finally, a score of 1 is when you are completely certain that you have evidence from either multiple user studies or A/B test experiments, or essentially when you have quantitative data that are coming from your analytics. And generally, if the probability score of an assumption is low, for example, let's say 1 or 2 in this case, then most likely this is not going to be your riskiest assumption. Now, going to the second factor, that is impact. And basically, impact is scored on a scale of 1 to 10. And it's about how much impact your assumption can have on the product, given your goals, of course. And this could be a combination of engineering work for a solution, or how much you think it addresses your user needs. So for example, it could be how much it will increase adoption, or how much it will delight users, or how much it's going to take the engineering team to implement the proposed solution, for example. And once you're done with the two factors, then you're ready to calculate the total risk score for every assumption that you have made. You should have then a prioritized list of riskiest assumptions for each theme or category that you've created in step one. And now it's time for you and your team to validate or disprove your assumptions. And here you have a few options, right? You can run surveys, or you can do concept testing with the design artifact and basically probe participants specifically about those assumptions. So let's look at an example, and I'll use the riskiest assumption canvas for this. So say that you have this brief or goal or idea for a product, like an app that a person can use to build relationships with their neighbors, right? So, all right, so first step is to map all the assumptions that are vital to the product and cluster them into groups. So I'll use the canvas as it already has some predefined categories already, which can help me kickstart this work. So for this example, I will just use the category problem as a category of choice, and I will add a few assumptions there. So, okay, in this category that I'm focusing on, what is the problem my users are trying to solve? What are their pain points? What are they currently doing to mitigate that problem? So in this case, I've came up with 4 different assumptions about the customers and their problems for this product. So assumption number 1 is that customers would use an app as a way to connect with their neighbors. Assumption number 2, customers find it difficult to build relationships with their neighbors. Okay. Assumption number 3, customers find it hard to discover what's on in their neighborhood. Assumption number 4, customers feel safer in their local area if they know who their neighbors are. Okay, I've got all my assumptions down. Now, next step is to score each assumption based on their probability and impact. And for this probability factor, my first and my third assumption are scored with a 5 because I have 0 data about them and I don't know if they're true or not at all. So essentially, it's a finger in the air right now. The second and fourth assumptions are scored a bit lower with a probability score of 3, as I've found some data in a few public surveys related to the difficulty in building relationships in the neighborhood, which raised my confidence a little bit. Now, thinking about the impact, I scored the first assumption with a 10 and the fourth assumption with an 8. Because if these 2 assumptions are not true, then there's a risk that people won't be using the app, which basically translates to no product market fit. I also scored the second assumption with a 6 and the third assumption with a 4, as there are other ways to discover what events are taking place in your local area. Just an example, by reading the local newspaper or our local magazine. So the next step, following the formula, is to calculate the risk for its assumption. So again, the formula that we talked about is risk equals impact times probability. And the assumptions with a higher score are also the riskiest assumptions. This means that I should focus my research efforts on validating or disproving those 2 first when it comes to the problem category for my product. And just to keep things neat and tidy, after I have applied the risk score, I reorder the list from highest to lowest risk, essentially. And I would rinse and repeat and apply the same method for all the other categories in the canvas too. What the results should look like is a prioritized list of riskiest assumptions for each category in that canvas. And this helps you and your team craft a research plan that basically revolves around the things that have an immediate impact on the product success and can make or break the product. All right, some takeaways I've learned along the way. So the Riskiest Assumption Canvas can help you and your team to, one, have a product that is not biased, because you'll be able to design products that are aligned with your customers' mental models and their needs as well, by validating your riskiest assumptions early on and not build products that are based on gut feeling or personal opinions from different stakeholders. Takeaway number two is that it will also help you to get it right with fewer iterations. So as you test your riskiest assumptions, you will be increasing your confidence in the product that you are building. And after each research study, you will have the evidence that shows you whether or not the product is heading in the right direction, which means that you will have higher chances to achieve product market fit and customer acceptance. Takeaway number three is that it will also help you to fail fast with lower risk, again, as a business, because you'll be able to learn much faster and also much safer. Because people in the startup world say fail fast, right? But not all failure is created equal. What is actually happening in a lot of cases is that the whole company sometimes fails from putting too much confidence in something that was poorly defined in the first place. You'll be able to fail fast on your MVP prototype and not create an engineering monster that will stay in production for years. And you will also be able to learn without having a whole team of engineers, and you'll be saving resources in that. Takeaway number four, this will also help you to collaborate and make decisions together as a team. Because using the canvas and also facilitating a riskiest assumptions workshop for you and your team, you have an opportunity to bring everyone together, from designers, researchers, PMs, or tech leads, or even engineers, and involve them in the decision making from the very, very start. You can get buy-in and basically reduce communication friction. All right. I want to also leave you with some tips when using the Riskiest Assumptions Canvas as well. So, tip number one, remember to educate your team about what Riskiest Assumption Workshop is and what value it will bring to the team. In my past experience, there have been many times where people had been unfamiliar with the term riskiest assumptions, what it means, how it works, and what value it can bring to the design process, and I think ultimately to the product itself. I found it very helpful to introduce the framework to my team first, either by having a brief discussion or a presentation where I would show them past examples of how it's done and what the impact was. Now, there might be cases where you don't have past examples. I think it's still worth having a brief chat with your team about the framework and explain why you want to use it and the benefits it will bring. And maybe you could do what you could do is have a fake brief and present them, how it will work. Tip number 2 is to remember to use categories to organize your assumptions. Again, from my past experience, I found that my team and I sometimes would feel blocked and not knowing how or where to start with generating assumptions. So using predefined categories really helps you to jumpstart the process and get those ideas flowing. Right. Tip number 3. Remember to think of the evidence when scoring your assumption. I think this is really important. So one thing that has helped me while scoring the probability of an assumption has been the confidence wheel, especially with the more vocal stakeholders. I always make sure I have the confidence wheel front and center so that everyone can see it. And for each assumption that we score, I ask, what evidence do we have that suggests this score? So use the confidence wheel as a reference and try to keep your team in the mindset of thinking about any quantitative or qualitative data you might have collected in the past through either user interviews or surveys or any testing sessions, even market trends, or even competitor data. This will help you set your confidence on whether an assumption might be true or not and define the risk status of each assumption. If you have quantitative or qualitative data collected, a good idea is to gather it in one place and reference it when you do this exercise. This could be in a print format if you're doing this, in a physical form, or it can be in a collaboration tool. You have everything, gathered in one place, all your quant and qual data there. Also, tip number 4. Remember to change the scoring after research is done. So after you have done the research study and validated or disproved your assumptions, your level of confidence will change in light of the new research finding. So once your research is done, remember to change the scoring in the assumption canvas as well, so that it's up to date and on track with the progress of your project. All right, and finally, tip number 5, remember to review your canvas and work on your assumptions on different stages of the product and the design lifecycle. So the predefined categories could work as a reminder to come back to the Riskiest Assumption Canvas and review your assumptions that you have already made and make additional ones if needed at later stages of the process, such as, for example, when you're brainstorming solutions or when you're defining the MVP. So in essence, as you go along in your project, you might start with more high-level assumptions that need to be tested and validated. But in later stages, once you are in the design ideation phase and you're in the weeds, for example, when you are working on something from a UI standpoint, you will probably make more detailed assumptions for specific features and UI ideas. And the canvas with the predefined categories can help you keep all your assumptions of the product that you're building in one place. And that's it. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to my talk. Back to you, Matt.
Thanks, Ioannis. That was great. Thank you very much. Cool. Mandar, do we want to? Oh, here we go. We've got a question already.
Just got one question. Yeah. So yeah, before we start with the questions, if you have any questions, just write them in the chat, or if you feel brave, you can just unmute and ask the questions yourself as well. So yeah, Ioannis, can you see the questions, or I'll just read them to you anyway. Yeah. So Faisal, I'm sorry if I got your name wrong. Faisal is asking.
Yes, me.
Yep. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I was about to ask this question about how to measure assumption, how to measure the assumption, but by using the confidential map, it's easy to measure the assumption. But how do practically understand what the impact it is going to make on the ground? So how will I do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And as I mentioned, I think so the way I when I talk about that framework, how I say is impact is either the impact on the user journey itself, or let's say that you've done your let's say your jobs to be done framework, and you know what are the jobs to be done, how much this assumption impacts the job to be done, or the user journey, or even, for example, it can be a combination of that and how much engineering effort it is to basically build that idea, or how, again, what's the feasibility of it. So usually it's a combination of two, is basically feasibility, but also impact on the on the user need or the user journey itself.
Or maybe impact in the business as well itself.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, if it's a high level assumption, for sure. Yeah.
Great. Anybody else got any questions?
Hello, I have two questions. First of all, interesting presentation, Ioannis. Thank you for sharing this knowledge. And I have two questions. The one it is, do you have any example from your, like how you use that and the impact that it had on the project, and how you avoid assumptions, like an example for us? And I have a second question. How did you convince a team like with PO and PM to use this kind of framework?
Great questions. Okay. So for my current workplace, unfortunately, I cannot share any examples. That's how Google works, unfortunately. So from the HR standpoint, I honestly can't. But how I've used it, basically, so okay, in a previous workplace, for example, I can talk about that. In a previous workplace, which is again similar to what I've done for Google, but I just can't mention the specific project. So one thing that I did, it was when we were thinking of a new product to kind of reach for a new market, we basically didn't know how to start, like where to start. Like we had some ideas. Essentially, the CEO had some ideas and the lead PM had some ideas, but from my point of view, all that was based on their point of view, So I gathered them plus a tech lead plus some engineers and the lead researcher in the room, and I did the same exercise that I just did with this imaginary brief. I basically tried to gather all the assumptions that we were making, because they would basically solutionize a lot. But what we needed at that point wasn't solutionizing, was actually the opposite. Was, okay, what is the high level questions that we have about what we're about to to create as a product. So that's more or less of how I've done that in the past, and that's the same for, again, even for Google. Like I've created 2 new products while working there. Again, too many assumptions, and that's then the more challenging part of that was, it was not only assumptions from from our end, because other teams were also part of that big project. They've also made assumptions as well. So it was great to kind of bring from each, let's say from each group, the representatives, and do this exercise with them, because then you could see if there are any dependencies. And again, that helps you to kind of create alignment early on, right? So that's one. The second question, can you repeat the second question?
The second, thank you for
Please.
answering actually, and giving an example. And the second question
No
is
worries.
how you manage to convince your PM and PO when, for instance, the deadlines are tight in order to do this kind of exercises.
Yeah, great question. So, in the case where, usually what happens in startups, like probably they wouldn't let you have your own, let's say, set of tools, and obviously, deadlines are always, important and everything. I tried to explain what the value was, and I tried to show them, especially with the project I was talking about. I shared what would happen if we build in a house of cards. So imagine that all your assumptions is a house of cards, that by just doing one flick, the user can just, destroy all this, house of cards, because it doesn't have solid, foundation. So basically how I made my point was, by using something like that, we basically establish ourselves, and we also set ourselves up for success, because we wouldn't be working on assumptions. And this is pretty, I would say, pretty easy to do, like as a thought experiment, because, for example, whenever someone says, this is what I think, or not even what I think, like we should do A or B or C, the first question is, okay, why do you think that is? Then they will explain why. Most probably it will be a bias or an assumption that they've made, because it wouldn't, in most cases, it wouldn't be based on some data. I had examples when the PM would be like, but we've heard this and that. Okay, where is that reference? So even when they do that, because that's one of the main my main challenges, for example, with Google was, everyone has strong opinions, but the mindset is strong opinions, weakly held. So, okay, you're saying that, okay, where's the evidence? And then when they bring the evidence using the, the confidence wheel, where is this in terms of evidence, right? So so this wouldn't be done in a vacuum. That's why I said that this could be, that the ideal set and format of this is in a workshop.
Good, thank you. Thanks a lot.
No worries. Thanks for your questions, Mariana.
And probably I'm going to introduce that. That is the reason that I'm asking. So in order for me to know.
Yeah, no, for sure. And that's, yeah.
So if you can share some slides on that, it would be nice.
Sure. I don't know. Yes, I can. Matt, can we share slides?
Yeah, we'll work out, because I had a request from someone else actually for the
Yeah.
slides. So we'll work out after the event how we can do that, if you're okay to do that.
Sure. I have also a Medium article about it, not as detailed as this talk, but I can share that if you want here in the chat as a start.
Cool. Yeah. Anything you've got, Ioannis, we can sort of share as a follow-up to this session.
Yeah. So we'll put it on the LinkedIn and the Meetup pages as well. So those who came from those pages, you'll probably get notification as well when we do that. So yeah.
Cool.
Great.
I think that's probably about time for questions.
Yeah.
I was just going to say again, thank you for an awesome talk, Ioannis. I can definitely empathize with what you were saying around kind of evidence when going through this kind of assumption mapping process. I really like that confidence where there's a way of kind of sort of allowing folks to objectively provide that evidence and score that evidence as well. I think that's really, really powerful. So yeah, thank you for sharing that.
No worries. Yeah, I found it to be powerful as well, because then again, one of the main takeaways within the startup world is biases and assumptions all over the place, which also happens like not only in startups, like everywhere. But again, in this, thinking of it that way, you basically remove the bias and you make it, you create a product that is actually serving user needs and you know that it's serving user needs, which then later what makes you do is you have product market fit, which I think what everyone wants at the end of the day.
Totally. Thank you. Awesome. I'm just going to kind of close now quickly. I'll share my screen again. Start with, I've got a blurry screen. Is that better? Very good. Can you see that? Cool. All right. So yeah, final thank you to Ioannis and round of applause. Really appreciate that. As we said, we're recording the session and we'll follow up with kind of notes and links to articles and various things. So, and I had a few requests, so thank you again. Just in closing, always looking for speakers as per the slide. If you want to talk or know somebody who would like to talk about a certain topic around aspects of UX research products, please do get in touch. We'd always love to host people. We welcome first timers, and we absolutely welcome sort of folks from underrepresented communities as well. So let us know either via our meetup page or on Twitter. We have various kind of channels through which you can reach us and find out more about what we do at Redgate and how we approach design. So you can follow us on our Ingenious Simple Medium site, Twitter, other social platforms, and obviously we'll upload this video with Ioannis's permission to our YouTube channel as well.
Sure. You have a lot of channels. That's great.
I know. We might need to rationalize some of those over time, but hey, you know. Cool. And on behalf of me, Amanda, and folks at Redgate, thank you all for attending today. Really appreciate it. Hope it's useful. I found it really kind of inspiring and really appreciate Ioannis's time there. And watch out for updates on future Redgate UX meetup sessions, and we'll keep you posted. So thank you all and have a great evening.